Hey everyone, today we're going to be covering one of the more complicated aspects of Europa Universalis 4, the economy. Now, this isn't actually that complicated, it's just that there's a hell of a lot to remember. So we're going to split this video into two parts. Part 1 is going to be a basic, high-level overview, enough for you to be able to play the game without getting into the nitty-gritty of everything. Part 2 is going to be, well, the nitty-gritty of everything. We're going to take a look at all these concepts and drill down into them and work out exactly how these formulas work and how everything comes together and what the best practice is in various situations. So hopefully this one's going to be a little bit shorter. Let's take a look. Okay, so let's take a look at the Ottoman economy in overview. If we go into the country's shield and then click on the economy tab, you'll be able to see a basic balance of the income and the expenses. Let's go over these in a quick bit of detail. Taxation is basically the sum of taxation. This is the easiest form to manipulate, as basically all you can really do is construct buildings that improve the tax rate percentage and also the base tax of the province as well. We'll look into that in a bit more detail, but for a basic high-level concept, building things like temples and constabularies will improve your tax income within a province. Production. Production is a measure of how many goods that your provinces are producing and basic local trade that isn't being passed on. If you click on a province itself, you'll be able to see the goods produced here. Production here as well also gives you an idea as to how much money you're making per year in that province. Increasing the amount of goods that you are producing will increase the money that you're gaining from production. Unfortunately, increasing the goods produced is actually quite difficult and requires the building of manufactories which aren't available until quite later in the tech tree. However, it's good to know that it's there. Trade is something that we're going to cover in more detail in just a moment, but this is basically just a measure of your traders wheeling and dealing. Rare spices and minerals coming in from distant lands and being traded and bartered for and tariffed and taxed within your empire. Speaking of tariffs, tariffs are income from your colonies. They're similar to production, however they are much, much lower. You can't rely on tariffs for money. There's just not enough there. Vassals. If you have any vassals, then you will get income from your vassals. They are required to pay you a tithe. The amount that you get depends on the amount of money that the vassal is making, as well as several other factors such as your government. For example, if you have a feudal monarchy, then you are able to actually increase the income from their vassals by 10%. Harbour Fees. If you have fleet basing right agreements with another empire, they are required to pay you for the use of your harbours. And war subsidies. If you are at war, another empire may offer to help fund your war, and that income appears there as well. The total income is here at the bottom. Broadly speaking, the best thing you can do with this economics is to keep the income higher than the expenses. Expenses, advisors. Hiring advisors costs money, as we've covered. Interest. This is interest being taken out on your current loans. Harbour fees. Again, if you are using another person's harbours, you have to pay them fees in much the same way they would have to pay you fees. Diplomatic expenses. War subsidies, supporting rebels, paying to your overlord if you are a vassal, and outgoing tariffs if you're a colonial nation. Colonial maintenance, missionary maintenance, army maintenance and fleet maintenance. The more money you're willing to pour into these people, the better they will perform. Reducing this amount will reduce the amount of money that you're spending on them and therefore reduce expenses, but will also reduce their effectiveness. For armies and fleets, it will reduce their morale. For missionaries, it will reduce the speed at which they will be able to convert the heathens. And for the colonials, well, as I say, I've not really played with colonies yet, so you'd have to have a look at that one yourself. The total balance here is the amount that you're getting each month. War taxes can be used to help subsidise the total maintenance cost of your armies and navies, but only when you're at war and only by spending 50 military power. Inflation. Inflation is a percentage increase on everything that you build. So consequently, as inflation goes up, the cost of everything goes up. Inflation is mainly increased through loans, however if you have gold mines, that can cause problems as well. Random events can also reduce or increase your inflation. So that's the basic economy screen. Taxation is something that we've already covered. Production is something that we've covered. We'll go into more detail on taxation and production in the next video, but for now, let's take a look at trade. The trade window here gives you basic, high-level information about the trade going on within your empire. It's not actually all that useful once you get your head around trade, but it's very good for identifying which areas it's going to be important for you to pay attention to. Trade efficiency is a bonus that you get on your income from all trade. The higher it goes, the more money you will make from trade. Trade range is how far you can send your merchant specialists. The higher that goes, the more distant trade nodes that you can send them to. We'll cover trade nodes in a moment. Trade steering is how easy it is for your merchants to actually push money out of a trade node and towards the trade nodes that you want. Trade income is again a measure of how much money you can make from the trade, as is mercantilism. Mercantilism is more of an impact on trade power than it is on the actual raw income, and we'll cover trade power now. So first, click on the trade map mode. You'll notice straight away that all the regions change. This is because the political map mode shows you nations, whereas the trade map mode shows you trade regions. You can see straight away that there is a lot of overlap between the Ottoman Empire and the Constantinople trade node. The Constantinople trade node is therefore very important, and maintaining a high level of power is vital for the Ottomans, as it's one of their main sources of income. So, how do we manipulate this? How do we make money out of this? Well, if you look closely, you'll see that each trade node has arrows going into it and out of it. The arrows coming in represent money that has not been absorbed in a previous trade node, i.e. money that has not been removed from the trade network and put into someone's purse. So straight away you can see why Constantinople is important. It has 4 trade nodes feeding into it and only 1 trade node feeding out. In addition, the Constantinople trade node has quite a lot of provinces in it with a high trade value. If you click on the node icon, that will take you to the menu. And here you can see the incoming trade, the local trade, the outgoing, and the total value. The total value is the maximum amount of money that you could make from that trade node in a perfect world where you were the only one collecting trade. Outgoing is the amount of money that is being steered away from the node. Local is the amount of money being added to the node by all of the provinces within it. And incoming is, well, it's these arrows which are feeding into the node. All you really need to know is that merchants can either collect or steer. So if we go back into the trade menu, you can see that we have 2 merchants. One of them is in Alexandria, steering trade or transferring it, and the other is in Constantinople, collecting. You only make money from merchants who are collecting gold. If you don't have any merchants in the network collecting gold, you will not make any money from the trade network. It's therefore vitally important that you have at least 1 merchant doing as such. In this case, one of our merchants, the one in Constantinople, is collecting trade, so we're okay. What about the other one though? What about the one in Alexandria? Well, this one is what's called steering trade. If you look at this icon here, you can see retained trade value and trade power pulled forward. This represents the competition between the merchants who want the trade to be pushed onto other nodes, most likely where you can collect that trade, and the merchants who want the trade to stay in that node and collect that money for their lord. The total trade power of all participants is added together and then divided up in percentages. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail in part 2 of this video if you're interested, but for now, all you need to know is the more trade power that you have in a trade node, the more effective your merchants will be at whatever they're doing. However, it's important to consider what other merchants are doing. If a majority of the merchants are trying to push the trade forward, you'll have a lot more luck working with them to try and push the trade forward than you would in trying to collect. On the other hand, if a large number of merchants are trying to collect from the node, you may make more money by collecting from that node with them than you would in trying to push it forward, because the amount that you're going to push forward is going to be so tiny that, well, it's not going to be worth it. Okay, so we've covered the basic fundamentals of trade. We've covered how trade moves between nodes. We've covered how nodes get added to with the trade value of all of the provinces within that node, and we've covered how you can collect from those nodes. Now, let's just have one final look at steering. You can see here in Alexandria that one of my merchants is steering trade. Whenever you have a merchant in a node assigned to steer, you can choose which of these areas you want them to send it to. So for example, let's say we didn't want the trade going to Constantinople, we wanted it going to Ragusa. We could track back from the Ragusa node, click there, and you can see that trade would be going to Ragusa instead. On the other hand, we really do want it going to Constantinople. These will update after the game has started running again. When it's paused, it doesn't do the necessary calculations. But you can see here that 1.3 gold is being sent forwards to Constantinople. And that about covers the basics of trade. All you really need to know in order to be able to play the game is that you need at least one merchant collecting gold from somewhere if you want to be making money from the trade network, and your remaining merchants can either be collecting from trade or steering, as the case may be. Generally speaking, the more power that you have in a trade node, the more beneficial it is to actually be collecting from that trade node. But again, you might want to consider other factors. So for example, here in Alexandria, because a fairly large percentage of trade is being pushed forwards anyway, it just makes more sense for us to try and push that trade into Constantinople where we can collect it anyway. 62% of the trade power is being put into making the gold stay there where it can be collected. But the amount of gold that's then collected is then divided by all of the people who are contributing their trade power to collecting that gold. So in this case, Cyprus is contributing 7% of that power, Hejaz 10%, and the Mamluks 46%. And the Mamluks, as you can see, control 40% of the trade power in that node. And if we go to the political map mode, it's easy to see why. They control the vast majority of that territory. Well, I hope that was useful as a basic introduction to the economy of Europa Universalis 4. Taxation is pretty simple and straightforward. Production is likewise fairly simple and straightforward. Trade is where you have to kind of puzzle over it for a while. But again, it's quite simple once you just get your head around the concepts. But if you want to go for a little bit more, join me in the next video and I will be looking into these mechanics in a little bit more detail and how you can manipulate them. But for now, I'm T, signing off.